Hello and welcome to ThePrint Softcover, our online platform for launching non-fiction books. I'm Pragya, and today we're joined by journalist and author Vauhini Vara. Her work has appeared in The Atlantic, The New Yorker, The New York Times Magazine, among other publications. Her debut novel, The Immortal King Rao, was a finalist for the 2023 Pulitzer Prize for Fiction, named the best book of the year by Esquire, and praised by publisher weeklies as a remarkable meditation. Her latest book, Searches, is a work of non-fiction, genre-blending exploration of technology, identity, and creativity in the age of artificial intelligence, and has been published by Harper Collins, India. First, thank you so much for being here.
Thank
I
you
think
for inviting me.
the cover really stands out to me. I think you discussed the image a bit in the book. What kind of conversation went into designing it?
Oh, it was a long conversation, and it was really interesting because at first, my publisher in the US commissioned an artist to create a design for the cover. And that artist tried a lot of different interesting designs, and none of them felt quite right for what this book was. And so in the end, the head of the art department at my US publisher, Pantheon, was at home talking to her husband, who's also a designer, about the book. And she had started reading the book, and she was talking with him about how she and I both wanted the book to have a cover that sort of engaged critically with the ideas in the book about technology. And so the two of them started talking, and together sort of came up with a new idea for a cover and presented it to me. And it was essentially the template was what you see there. It didn't have the image. It just had sort of an idea for the kind of image that might appear there. And they presented it to me, and I thought, oh, this is perfect. Because what they did was they took the title of the book and asked ChatGPT, what do you think this book is about? And then they showed it an image and said, why do you think this book, what about this image might illustrate the book, or something like that? And so that's what they presented to me. And I said, I think this is perfect. There's actually an image in the book that I talk about in the book that I think would be even more perfect. And so the only change they made in response to my feedback was replacing the image, which wasn't an image they were planning to use in the first place. It was just for me to see the idea. They replaced that with an image from the book that is an important image in the context of the book. And I think it reflects really well what I think the book is about.
I think what surprised me most, I was coming at it from, I think, that this is going to be a technology book. And then I read it and I was deeply moved. And within the first 100 pages, I think that I instantly knew this was a deeply urgent read. It was quite an emotional experience for me. How did you conceptualize it?
Oh, well, thank you for saying that. I mean, yeah, I think there's a way to talk or write about technology as if it's this intellectual concept that has nothing to do with our actual lives. And I guess I was trying to figure out how to write about technology in a way that made clear how urgent the relationship is between ourselves and it really ourselves and other people, other human beings, and what that's like when it's not mediated by technology, and how technology has changed the way we communicate with one another. And I think I knew from the start that I wanted to tell this story partly through the technologies themselves, right? So the book includes my own Google searches. It includes my own Amazon reviews. I'm sort of reconstituting all this language from my use of the internet in the book itself. So I knew I wanted to do that. And I actually did that and sent that to my editor. I just had all these chapters that were kind of experiments with technology. And then she wrote back to me, and then we talked on the phone. And what she said was, listen, I think you know what it is you're trying to articulate here, but I'm not sure that readers will unless you explain it a little bit more. And so that's when I added sort of all this additional material in the book, which was me kind of talking in a more conventional and writing in a more conventional way about my experiences with technology over the years and all of our experiences with technology, so that when you got to this chapter, for example, made up of my Google searches, readers would have the kind of context to understand what I was trying to do there.
I think that's such a good point because so much of it is your personal experiences. It is part memoir. How much of the book was shaped by your very personal experience of going to Stanford, your time as a Silicon Valley reporter in the early 2000s. Did you feel like this kind of gave you a front row seat to the tech world as it was evolving? How did that come
Yeah.
together?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I don't think it's necessary to have had those experiences that I had in order to like engage critically with big technology companies. But certainly, I grew up in Seattle at the time that Jeff Bezos was starting Amazon in Seattle, at the time that Microsoft was growing in Seattle. And then I went to college at Stanford at the time that Facebook was starting on college campuses, including Stanford's. And then I graduated, and the company that I wrote about was Facebook. And so I interviewed Mark Zuckerberg and spent time with him and other executives. Later, I wrote an article about Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, and so was able to spend time with him. And so, I think the big additional insight I think that gave me was that I think it's easy for us to say, like, we are victims of these specific individuals. People like Mark Zuckerberg and Sam Altman and Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk are exploiting us and we are their victims. But I think having spent a little time with some of those people has given me an appreciation of the extent to which these people don't think of themselves as villains who are out to exploit us, right? I think all of us in some ways are both beneficiaries of this system that we've all created and victims. And so just in the same way that we claim to be victims of Amazon and Google and Facebook, and yet we still use their products, I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that that's not so different from the way in which Jeff Bezos and Sam Altman and Mark Zuckerberg are trapped in the roles that they have, needing to build quote unquote successful companies for their investors. And I think having met some of those people in person and understood their motivations and how they changed over time has helped that be clear to me in a way that it might not have been if I hadn't spent time covering the companies.
I think that even the conclusion, again, this struck me was the fact that this conclusion is this kind of chorus of women voices in which you're kind of talking about what it means to be human, and yet you're utilizing technology in that, right? You are emailing your participants and they are emailing you back, and then technology becomes this mode of connection. And I found it really interesting. So how did you think about that idea? How is that something that you have kind of come to terms with, the interplay of human and technology?
Yeah, I mean, with that one, it was interesting because what I did was I created a Google form survey, and I emailed it to people. I posted it on social media. I even hired people through Amazon's Mechanical Turk service to fill it out. And so I used all these different methods of soliciting responses to the survey. What I was thinking about there was that, if I'm not mistaken, that is the one technology that I engage with in the book where it's the exploitation of the user. There isn't as clear of a link between our use of the product and exploitation of us. And the reason is that Google Forms and Google Sheets are products that Google uses to sort of get people in the Google ecosystem, but Google is not, as far as we know, using the material that we put in these products to influence us through marketing, for example, right? Or otherwise benefit financially. So it makes it an interesting dynamic because we can use these products to communicate with one another, right? We can use Gmail to communicate with one another. We can use Google Forms to send surveys like the one I did. And the link between that and exploitation is like more tenuous than it is with some of the other products that I'm writing about. And so in a way that opens up space to see if we can sort of like claim these spaces for our own purposes in a way that is more divorced from exploitation than with some of the other products. So that was the starting place. And of course, ultimately, I was interested in kind of like imagining my way toward, or a sort of collective imagining of ways forward that that might suggest a path that's different from from the path that people like the CEOs of OpenAI and Google and Meta and Amazon put forward, which is a future that continues to be corporate dominated. I wondered what kind of space could a Google Form survey open for an imagining of lots of other different possibilities.
Immediately when I read the first 100 or so pages, because I think it's really, really personal, and I wondered how it felt to share that with ChatGPT. A part of me felt that, is this, did you feel vulnerable? Did you feel exposed? And, sharing so much information with OpenAI, something that we don't know how they're utilizing this information. So how did that feel?
Yeah, I mean, it felt my goal was I would never really recommend to anyone that they share large swaths of their own work with OpenAI. And the reason I was doing it was sort of like to highlight the pitfalls of doing that and to show through. I was kind of like trying to make myself a guinea pig in a way, like a sort of like do as I say in the book, not as I do sort of exercise. So yeah, I mean, it felt very vulnerable, very exposed. It also felt like there was a little joke embedded in it too, because by the time I did that, we already knew it had already been reported that companies were using published books to train their AI systems, right? And so there's a way in which like I know that that certain companies have used my previous, at least my first book, my novel, to train their models to generate language, right? And so my thinking was there's a decent chance that this new book would be used in that way, right? And so what might it look like for me to like sort of initiate that myself by literally explicitly sharing the contents of my book with OpenAI? Like it felt like there was a sort of like game or joke embedded in that I hope the reader can recognize too, right? Like hopefully the reader feels like I and the reader are in on this exercise together. And it's showing us something about the way these products function. The thing that I was not interested in at all was like ChatGPT's actual analysis of my book. Like I didn't expect that ChatGPT would have any particularly interesting analysis of the book. And it didn't, in my view, end up having any particularly interesting analysis. But the reason I included that was that it showed all of the sort of rhetorical tools like that a product like this can use to manipulate a user.
Again, I think that when I was reading the book, I think you also mentioned this in your article in The Guardian, that you use a bunch of quite leading questions to question AI and kind of figure out the tools that it's using. I'm just interested to know, like, what were your takeaways of OpenAI's analysis? And
yeah, I mean, I'm glad you bring that up because the way I think about, I use the word, I think, game or joke. And the reason I use that word is that I myself, as a user of this product, was trying to manipulate the product, right? Like I wanted it to reply in a way that would reveal to readers something that I wanted readers to see about the product. And I knew how to ask questions or initiate a conversation with the product in a way that might be leading, such that the product might generate answers that were in line with what I wanted to show, right? And so there's sort of a mutual manipulation taking place. And I think what's interesting to me about that is that that's the way we use these products. Any of us use these products, right? Like we're always trying to manipulate these AI-based chatbots to do what we want them to do. That's why these products, that's the sort of how these products are sold to us. It's, if you chat with these products, you can get them to do what you want them to do. And so I was trying to do that in a very specific way. And yet the question in my mind is, even as I'm doing that, what are the ways in which OpenAI, as a company with far more resources and power and wealth than I, the user, have, like, what are the ways in which OpenAI ultimately wins? Because I think OpenAI ultimately does win if I'm to sort of describe the conversation, the dialogue with ChatGPT in the book as a kind of rhetorical struggle. There's a way in which from the start, OpenAI is destined to win that battle because it owns the tool, right? I'm not the owner of ChatGPT. It owns it. It designed it the way it wants to design it. It has access to everything that I put in the machine. I don't have access to what's on the back end of the product, right? And so I wanted to sort of like show all of that playing out in the conversation itself.
Did you think that this is what I was curious about, that while you're having this conversation with ChatGPT, do you think that you were steering ChatGPT in some way, or were you just kind of exploring what it would say?
I felt I was steering it in some way. I was attempting to steer it. And the interesting thing about these products is that we don't know why they answer our questions the way they do, right? But my goal was to try to steer it in a particular direction.
Also, I think that because OpenAI has mentioned that ChatGPT responds differently, because of course there is a certain level of subjectivity involved. So I was curious as to how much information it had gauged about you, so that it was also steering the conversation a particular way.
That's true, yeah.
So how did you feel about that, especially when you're revealing, I think, so much information about your personal life? Do you think that they're utilizing it in some way? Does it have maybe insidious reasons? I think that maybe, how Google collects analytics about us. Is OpenAI doing the same way to an even more advanced level?
I mean, what I can say is that what seems obvious is that to the extent that OpenAI wants to be a successful business, the main ingredient, the raw material it has in order to do that is what it can learn about us through what we tell it, but also the way in which we use language interacting with it. And the most successful, financially successful possible version of this kind of product would be something that is able to use not only the information it knows about us, but what it has gleaned about us from the way in which we communicate to influence us in ways that are very precisely targeted. I answer the question that way because I can't say with certainty that I can't identify with certainty the extent to which OpenAI is or isn't doing that in this conversation that I put in the book, right? But I wanted, there are some ways in which journalism can fall short sometimes when we're trying to explore these ideas, because the fact that I don't know certain things with certainty means that I would never write an article, for example, saying OpenAI is deliberately doing X, Y, and Z in its chatbot. But in the context of the book, I'm able to sort of like raise some questions about the functioning of the product, right? In ways that I hope catch people's attention and make them ask the same questions and hold OpenAI accountable to at some point addressing them.
I think a lot of the book also revolves around conversation. There's this very interesting part in which you're talking about shifting to Spain and then having trouble communicating. So I think that this
Mhm.
book is as much about communication as it is about, anything else. If not,
Yeah.
this is the main crux of the book. So I think that, and OpenAI and Facebook, Instagram are all seen as tools for communication.
Mhm.
So let's talk about that for a bit. What does dialogue mean to you, especially in this quite strange place of human and machine?
Yeah. I mean, one could describe language, like the way in which we talk, the way we write, the way we use images, as a technology as well, right? So if we define a technology as like a tool built by humans in order to get ahead, if we were to describe it in that sort of crude way, then language is maybe like the most powerful of the tools like that we have created. And I think what's interesting to me about language is that it has always been used to manipulate. It has always been used to amass power on the part of the powerful. But then it has also been used to push back against that. It's been used to sort of push back against existing power systems, try to dismantle those systems, try to creatively imagine other futures that are different from the present and the past, right? And so language is like this really flexible tool that we have available to us that sometimes is aligned with power, but doesn't have to be. And so I'm really glad you brought up that question of language, because for me, I agree. I think language and communication is for me what the book is really about. It's about sort of like that push and pull between our use of language, including when we're using technology products, to in ways that are like aligned with moral and ethical values that feel resonant to me, and then ways in which language can be manipulated, often by rich and powerful institutions, to convince us to behave in ways that are aligned with their goals. And, I'm interested in positioning technology products, including AI, as sort of belonging to this long history in which, language is used to manipulate, but language is also used to legitimately communicate and push back against manipulation and tell the truth. Um, so, I think this book has sometimes been described as like a book about AI, and I don't think of it that way at all. I think of AI as just being the latest example of a way in which those in power are interested in using the language to serve their purposes, but also a really rich site of exploration for the rest of us to figure out whether there are ways that we can continue to express our own agency and power using those products.
Again, as much about communication, you keep going back to art in the book. And
Yeah.
again, um, the role of art and AI as an extension and technology as an extension of art is so
Yeah.
crucial to this discussion, because it does seem like AI might be this beautiful thing, but it might also be Icarus going too close to the sun. So,
Yeah.
how do you see that?
I mean, because building AI products, at least right now, takes so many resources, natural resources, financial resources, all of the mainstream products that people use are built by companies that are pouring a lot of resources into building these products with the goal of eventually making some kind of return on their investment. And so to me, the the fact of AI is like inextricable from that. But as you said, these AI image generation products are really just the latest product, the latest manifestation of a long history of the use of images, both to exert power and control and to amass more power and wealth, and to push back against that and to describe the world on people's own terms, right? And so I have this chapter in the book where I am showing images from antiquity of, for example, artwork that was created by women and therefore that is thought to have been created by women and therefore has a different perspective from the artwork that came later when art became the sort of dominant forces in art ended up being more patriarchal, and images of women, for example, tended to objectify those women. AI being just the latest iteration in this long process, these AI image generation tools basically are amplifying the norms that exist in art that is easily, readily available on the internet, right? So to the extent that the kind of images that are readily available on the internet reify a kind of patriarchal, US-centric white view of the world, these AI products are doing the same, but they're doing it more intensely. And yet at the same time, I am interested in ways in which artists might use the tools in creative ways that exercise their own agency and maybe try to kind of dismantle popular understandings of like how these AI products function and show them for what they really are.
I think there's a portion in the book that talks about artists and writers' relationships with ChatGPT and other AI tools. And I was just curious as to see how, as a writer, and how do you feel? What's the future of AI? I think you're one of the few writers that has actually incorporated it in some way, but I think you're right, it's hardly a collaborative process. So what does this mean for fiction writers? Do you think it should be an incorporation? Should there be another way out? What do you think?
I mean, I hesitate to say what other writers or artists should or shouldn't do, because I think people are endlessly creative and will come up with all kinds of interesting ways to engage with these products or not engage with them. But what I will say is that I do think that the message is fairly inextricable from the medium, right? By which I mean, if we are using a product built by a big technology company in order to make more money to create art, if we as users are doing that, I think it's difficult to do that without that image that's being generated saying something about the power behind the creation of the image. And so, I think there's a lot of conversation now about just like this basic question of kind of like the quality of the text or images that these products generate. And to me, I find that question less interesting than the question of who benefits when an image is created by these products, right? Like, what are the cultural norms that are being reinforced every time these products are used? How are those norms different from the norms of us as actual individuals? How is the beneficiary of the use of the products different from the beneficiaries that exist when we are creating art in different ways? And how can the art itself like be engaged with those facts and those questions?
So I think that what's really interesting was that you did highlight some resistance at the end against this kind of technological capitalism that we were seeing by artists, by writers. What do you think that is going to look like in the future?
The writer Ursula Le Guin, who I quote in the book, put it really nicely in a speech about 10 years ago when she was speaking about big technology companies and their power, and pointed out that in the age of kings, in the age when monarchies were the dominant form of power, people probably thought that that was the only power form of power, expression of power that would ever exist, the only organization of society that would ever exist. But then what happened is that people decided together to create new forms of government, and democracy emerged and socialism emerged and various other forms of potential forms of government emerged from that. And so it would seem to follow. What I appreciate about the role of writers and artists in society is that it is the job of artists and writers to imagine, and to imagine possible futures that don't currently exist. And so I think there's a really interesting role for artists of all kinds going into the future as a kind of counterweight to the narratives that are put forth by big technology companies. There are these sort of, what the writer Shoshana Zuboff calls inevitabilist narratives, in which people like Sam Altman and Mark Zuckerberg describe one possible future as if it's definitely going to come to pass. And so they use language like, this will happen. In the world that we're about to enter, things will be this way, as if we have no other choice. And that's definitely the world that we're entering. And by describing that world, they then sort of compel institutions, including governments and school systems and health systems, to try to help conspire to bring about the conditions that will make that future come to pass. And so I think artists are in a unique position to say, well, what about all the other possible futures we could imagine instead? Like, maybe we should spend some time thinking about those and describing those, so that we might, end up in a future that's different from the one that Sam Altman or Mark Zuckerberg or Donald Trump or whoever describe. And I find that really compelling.
There's this AI model called DeepSeek, China's DeepSeek, which basically, if it asks you about dissident artists, responds, let's talk about something else. Which I found really interesting, because I keep coming back to this idea of control, right? Control by a government, by rich billionaires over the information that we receive, over the artists that we know of. Is that a fear? Is that something that we should be wary of?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we don't know exactly how these products function. I'm talking about AI products like DeepSeek or ChatGPT, but also any of these products. We just don't have access to the inner workings of the algorithms that determine what we see. And so that puts us in a position in which we have to rely on these companies to provide us information. And that comes with this assumption of trust, right? Like, I'm using this product because I believe the product is going to tell me the truth. And yet we know from research that these products, and again, not just AI products, but search products and commerce products, aren't built to necessarily tell us the truth. They're built to make money for the company behind them. And so that leads us to a dynamic in which we as human beings have less information, have less sort of reliable information, and the companies have more and more reliable information because they're gathering it from us, their users. And that creates a lot of instability, including in our political systems, in our institutions. And I think, that's what we're seeing now already. And AI is just a continuation of it.
So what do you hope that readers take away from the book?
I hope that readers take away a sense of possibility, right? A sense, what I didn't want in the book was to sort of prescribe a different path forward. I didn't want to say, Sam Altman and Mark Zuckerberg want path X. Now I will describe path Y, which is the path we should go down instead. I wanted to do the opposite of that, which was to create, hopefully, like a really wide opening for readers and all kinds of people to come in and say, well, let's decide for ourselves what all the infinite possible futures are that we might step into, and then maybe bring them into being.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I just think that I'd like to end by asking what's next for you.
I am working on various things. I am continuing to work as a journalist and am really interested in AI in my work as a journalist and in understanding how it functions and its relationship with power. So I'm working on some articles along those lines. And I am also working on a play adaptation of my essay Ghosts, which is a chapter in the book. And I am working on a new novel, but I have no idea what the future of that novel is.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for talking to me.